Hi everyone. Hi everyone. Welcome to the debate. We'll just wait a bit longer until more people have arrived and then get started. If you want more information on the referendum in general, I just sent a message to the chat with a link. And also, if you have any questions, we have an Q&A option where you can just ask questions anonymously or with your name. And I'll keep them suppressed during the speeches. But at the very end, when everybody has spoken, then I'll publish them and then the speakers can respond to your questions. If you have any technical questions or something like that, then just put them in the chat or yeah. Thanks for coming. I'd say we'll just give it like 2-3 more minutes and then we'll get started. Okay, I think this seems like a good time to start. Ethan, if you're ready, then let's get going. All right.
Okay, brilliant. Am I on?
I think you should be on now.
Okay, yeah, there we go. Okay, thanks very much, actually, and thanks to the other panelists. And also thank you to everyone who's come along. I think this is a really important issue, and I hope that at the end of this we can all have a little bit of a better idea about how we're going to vote in the referendum. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start off with a brief overview of the NUS, what they've done for us at Bath Uni, what they're doing for us, and why we should stay affiliated. So the NUS represents students in the UK by lobbying the government and also providing support to student unions to lobby their own universities. So 95% of student unions in the UK are affiliated, and our SU sends 6 elected delegates to a national conference each year, and there they represent our issues, opinions, and views, and then that helps to shape the campaigns and influence their policy. On this issue, I think what we need to do is strip it down to its most basic level, and I think that that's about value for money. So our affiliation costs £30,000 a year. And I think in the grand scheme of things, that's quite a relatively small number. The SU's total expenditure in 2020 was over 4.5 million. And so this means that as a proportion of the SU spend, it only really accounts for 0.65%. And since the SU hasn't actually said what they would spend this money on if we disaffiliated, I'd ask that maybe we don't cast our votes on the basis of vague promises of an extra 30,000 spent on societies or sports or activities, just because we don't know. So is our affiliation worth the £30,000? During the pandemic, the NUS has negotiated early releases on student tenancies across the UK, and that's put 500 million quid back in the pockets of students. Through lobbying of the government, they've also secured £174 million worth of hardship funds, the most recent of which was a 50 million tranche, which was announced only a couple of weeks ago. And I had a brief exchange with the SU president, who was in talks about how our SU was going to distribute Bath's chunk of that. So as I mentioned, the NUS doesn't just lobby the government, but it also is lobbying our own university. So a couple of practical ways in which that's happened is the resources and tools that they've provided to the SU to secure rent rebates. Our first years at Bath have just had their rent rebates extended until the 8th of March, which is really positive news. And I think on top of that, we've also benefited. The SU's also benefited from the support that the NUS provided in their initial No Detriment campaign. So we're one of 28 universities now in the UK that actually has one of those no detriment policies in place. Although it doesn't affect all of us, the NUS also played quite a significant role in getting the U-turn on the A-level algorithm last summer, which has meant that I'm sure there's first years now at Bath who possibly wouldn't have been able to make it into the university with their original results, but as a result of that campaigning and that overturn, were now able to come. I think finally, a really important point, the NUS was very involved in negotiating this mass testing, which allowed us to go home and see our families at Christmas and over the holidays. So I ask that you consider that with all of these impacts, £30,000 is, and that's just over those impacts I mentioned are just over the pandemic. That those £30,000 is quite a small sum. Just to mention what it's doing going forward, they're running a Students Deserve Better campaign, which is aiming to uphold our basic legal rights, ensure that we're not academically impacted, that we're reimbursed for rent, and that we are treated on the whole fairly on a national level. It's also working on a campaign called Decolonise Education, a campaign which I think that Bath in particular can benefit from as a university that tends to come out quite lowly ranked in general diversity metrics. I think that it's important to mention as well that in 2020, the NUS went through its biggest reform in 50 years. And what that's done is it's aimed to become a more transparent organisation and also to bring those decisions that it makes a lot closer to the students. I think now more than ever, it is really vital that we're affiliated to NUS. I think it's no secret that during the pandemic, we've been ignored and mistreated by the government. We've been blamed for outbreaks, we've been locked in halls, we've been told to stay away from university and then charged for unoccupied accommodation. We're still paying essentially nine and a bit thousand pounds for what is a glorified streaming service. And alone, our NUS doesn't have the power to influence this policy on a national level. It'd also be weakened by in its ability to lobby internally without having those resources that the NUS provides. To win respect and better treatment for all students from the government, We have to campaign collectively across universities, and that's essentially what the NUS does. Now more than ever, we as students have to stick together to campaign for proper treatment. I ask you to consider whether now is really the time that we should be turning our backs on an organisation that is fighting for our rights on a national level. Now more than ever, students should be sticking together and standing up for ourselves against the mistreatment that we have suffered during the pandemic. Thank you very much for listening. I'll pass it back to Axeli now. Thanks very much.
Actually, you're muted.
Thanks for that, Joe. That was an awesome speech. Now I would like to ask Jacob, who's speaking for the Leave side, so proposing that we shouldn't remain affiliated with the NUS UK.
Hi. So I'm Jacob. I'm a final year physics student, and today
One second. Jacob, I think I haven't connected you to the live yet. Give me a second.
No worries.
Okay. You should be connected now.
Sure. So hi, I'm Jacob, a final year physics student, and today I'm going to talk to you a bit about what the NUS do for us and how we can do it better, the financial implications of staying in the NUS, and the structural issues with the NUS that diminish its lobbying power and national voice. So, as Ethan explained, a lot of what we get from it, or most of it, is campaigning. But we can achieve great national campaigns without it, such as For Our Future's Sake, which was a national campaign outside of the NUS that mobilised thousands of students for remaining in the EU. The Forgotten Students campaign that has recently come out of Sheffield SU, which with our great network with other SUs that we can enhance, has helped promote the issues that students are facing during COVID. But then when the NUS do try to provide support, such as with the no detriment policy, the support they provided was a map of what other universities are doing. No national push that we would expect for the amount that we're paying, a map that wasn't publicised or anything. But we managed to get the university to push to change on a lot of issues with the no detriment policy, suggesting that a local approach is better. Would the university, public and government not be more receptive to campaigns that come directly from us rather than a big overarching body trying to represent 600 unions' different opinions? Even on the NUS's website, and as Ethan has mentioned, many of what it has done to support us through the pandemic has actually come locally, such as the rent rebates that came from RSU pushing, and that is only available for first years. The early release of tenancies, the NUS has not managed to get far on that for others. Decolonising the curriculum, that has come from RSU and our university being pushed. Disaffiliating will allow us to focus on local issues to our students and campaign better on national ones by having a much more respected body, RSU, represent us, and allowing students to express how we feel rather than someone representing us, expressing how we feel as 1/600th of a cohort. And we can be a great SU without the NUS. Loughborough, their 4th best SU ranked by What Uni, and they're not affiliated. Dundee, they're 7th, and they're not affiliated. We can still be great, we can be better while not being affiliated with the NUS. We can focus on our priorities coming from the ground up so our voice can be heard and used more effectively. So if all we're getting is campaigning and we can do that better, why are we paying £30,000? You can check the SU's website. Most of what we benefit from, we will keep, such as access to Totem, trading power for cheap alcohol, and crisis support and resources. So they take £30,000, and what do we get in return? We get to take part in their democracy. We get to vote in delegates who represent our uni, who then go on to vote for policies in the NUS to focus on that may or may not be relevant to us, that may or may not be what we voted for. And then what do we do? Then what do? They lobby a government who doesn't want to listen to them and the general public who have lost respect for them after controversy after controversy, such as undemocratic proceedings and bankruptcy. So, do they represent us well, and could we do it better? Nationally, it is not seen to represent what students are really facing. We need to bring this representation down a level to for people, instead of people who are voting for people to lobby the government. We need to strengthen our national networks with other SUs so that we can lobby the government and public from the ground, so they know how students here really feel and what we really care about here in Bath. We pay £30,000 for, as I've described, I would say is very little. £30,000 to be able to vote for people and policies in the NUS. More importantly though, where could that money be better spent? Extra staff, more society funding, enhancing the Edge, a large building the SU has recently taken on. Also, the SU sadly has announced that it has a deficit of over £200,000 this year. It could be used to help fill this instead of finding cuts elsewhere. These are all things that we could consider, but sadly we cannot at the moment. This leads me on to the structural issues associated with the NUS. Let me expand more on the undemocratic proceedings. Do you know who your NUS officers are who represent you nationally? Probably not, as we didn't vote for them. They're voted on at conferences that very few of us can attend, as Ethan said, only 6. This seems like quite a long chain between us and the people who supposedly represent us nationally. And it does show. There have been a number of failed campaigns that have cost a lot, and that money has been wasted. For example, £40,000 in 2015 that, to shame politicians that achieved nothing but reducing its lobbying power and respect. Why not put us on the forefront of campaigns and allow us to decide what we want to campaign for nationally? We need more of a choice on how our voice and money is used. And that's not to mention their financial mismanagement in the form of a financial crisis that was realised in 2004 and that was left to fester into a £3 million deficit in 2018. This leaves the possibility of our fees doubling back up to £60,000 as they have been in previous years. So, as I've told you, we can run great campaigns on our own. We can run campaigns from the ground up to get real students representing our causes, providing more credibility and respect from universities and authorities we are lobbying. We can make sure that our issues are heard nationally and locally, not just whatever the NUS votes for, and that there is the extra funding for our SU, possibly, to enhance student experience. So I call on you to ask, what does the NUS do for us, and can we do it better? We've been with the NUS for a while now. We aren't getting our money's worth. Why not try it on our own, from the ground up, with other SUs, so that we are better prevented and represented and can enhance our networks? And if it all goes terribly, we can have another referendum. Thank you. You're on mute again.
Again with the mute, actually.
Yeah, oopsie, sorry guys. Thanks Jacob, that was awesome. Yeah, what can the NUS do for us, and can we do it better? Now I will ask Joe to speak again for the pro affiliation side. Yeah. Well, you're live, Joe.
Brilliant, thanks Axley. Hi everybody. My name's Joe. I'm a second year even math student, and as Axley said, I'm speaking in favour of affiliation. I'm going to spend most, if not all of this, responding to things that Jacob said. I think some of the ideas he raises are important things to be thinking about. You know, is the NUS democratic? Is how is it spending its money? Could we do better on the local level? But I think there are a couple of really important sort of through points that are sort of missing from the way he is talking about this. Firstly, I want to re-emphasize what Ethan said in his speech, which is that this 30 grand we're spending is fundamentally a drop in the ocean. And what that means is, 0.65% is tiny. It pales in comparison to donations we receive. It pales in comparison to bar revenue we receive as a students' union. And it pales in comparison to our spending on other things, which means that not spending it anymore just doesn't really do anything, just doesn't really help. And what that means is that all of the great ideas that Jacob came up with are fundamentally not mutually exclusive with staying affiliated to the NUS. In other words, they don't really have much bearing on how we should vote in this referendum, whether we should stay or whether we should go, because we can, exactly as he says, disaffiliate from the NUS and then, do loads of great new local campaigning, establish national campaigns across students unions outside the NUS, all that stuff. Or we can stay affiliated to the NUS, maintain the campaigning that they've done, continue to benefit, continue to have this down payment on the great national achievements they've made during the pandemic, and do all of those other things as well. The money we're paying doesn't stop us from doing any of the other things that Jacob is suggesting. I also want to talk briefly about this idea of what is, effectively delegate democracy that we have. Students at the Uni of Bath, we directly elect our SU officers, and then our SU sends delegates to the NUS's conference. The trade-off that we're making there is, firstly, it means we have to, as students who, don't have all the time in the world, we're busy, we've a lot to be getting on with. And it means that there's less of a risk that we are being asked to vote on a huge number of different elected positions for a national students' union, rather than just electing students from our university to then speak on our behalf. And if we do want to have input into these decisions that are made, we have that right. We know who our SU Bath representatives are. We can put policies forward to them for them to take to conference, and we can find out who our NUS delegates are. And the idea that, you probably don't know who your NUS delegate is, kind of misses the point. If we're not participating in the way that we could be, if we're not using the fullness of the democracy that's available to us, that's on us, rather than it being a problem of the fact that we are affiliated. Also, there was some mention of how much did the NUS really accomplish in getting the government to do what it has done in terms of these national campaigns. The NUS did publish a map, but it also did a lot behind the scenes. It's a lot of behind the scenes lobbying. It's a lot of, emailing powerful people, speaking coherently and with one voice on behalf of the student body. And that is the name of the game at a national level. Because it's easy to imagine that SU Bath is, and, every other local SU all, speaking separately is, more authentic and more direct. But the real result of that would be garbled, would be confused, because obviously students' unions spread across the country are not going to agree at any one time about exactly what they want to be emphasizing, what they want to be putting forward, and especially about questions of tactics and strategy. In other words, the national campaigning is so much more effective when it's done by a sort of nationwide confederation of SUs like the NUS than when done by unis more sporadically and independently on a local level, because it makes the campaigning coherent. It means that we can all speak with one unified voice. And when there are people like the government who will want to discredit the idea of students wanting X or students wanting Y in the patronizing way that they so often do, the existence of the NUS as unambiguously the voice of students takes that argument away. If you had one students' union from one part of the country arguing for one thing and a more affluent one arguing for another, the government can just point to the counterexample anytime there's a student campaign of any description and say, well, you don't speak for all students. The NUS does speak for all students, and it's the only way there can be such a voice, so that when we really do agree on stuff, that gets put forward and it gets heard. Finally, the fees did used to be 60k. They came down to 30k, and there's no good reason to expect they're going to rise again. Because that was post these reforms, this division of the political arm of the NUS versus the collective buying and the charity work. So 30k looks like the pattern from now on, and we will have, just as we would have the choice to re-affiliate if we disaffiliated, if fees rise again, we can do this again, and we can talk about whether 60k, you know, just over 1% of our total expenditure, is an amount of money worth going to the hassle of disaffiliating over. The argument I want to finish with is this: the NUS is going to keep existing regardless of whether SU Bath is affiliated to it, which means that all disaffiliating accomplishes, it doesn't revitalize SU Bath as this great national campaigning force. All it does is take our voice away from what will remain the voice of students. Better to be on the inside and able to change things if we don't like them than on the outside not being heard. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Awesome, Joe. That was great. Before I invite the last speaker, Aidan, to speak for the disaffiliation side, I will, during his speech, publish the Q&A for our speakers to have a look at it. But if you still want to ask any questions, now's the time. So go for it. All right. Aidan, I'm now sending you live.
Great. So I'm going to be speaking for about 7 minutes on just to kind of round up the arguments on the leave sort of side. I just want to I'll spend most of my time kind of picking through why I think some of Joe's arguments are flawed and actually kind of mischaracterize kind of the issues that we're looking at here. And I'm also going to and then kind of underline why I really think Jacob's arguments have kind of really should sway you towards thinking that we should leave. First off, there's an interesting point by Joe that says, oh, you know, the NUS will keep existing, right? And because it should keep existing, we should therefore definitely cast our vote kind of in favor of NUS. But firstly, change isn't going to happen unless other SUs make that movement. And secondly, also by nature of it keeping existing, if all these campaigns and things that represent universal student opinion are happening, then they're still going to take place regardless of whether we're spending our 30k. So we can make the 30k saving and ignore and kind of, you know, and we can take that step away. We can cast that kind of vote of preferring a more local philosophy in our kind of student representation. Also, we had this claim that if there is a flaw that we don't know who our representative officers are, that's on us. I think that this is incredibly almost I don't want to say victim blaming, but kind of like it points the finger where the finger shouldn't be pointed, where if you create such an obscure system, such a layered system with kind of tiers of representation, and when you really look into it, where people have to bring proposals and they have to come up with proposals that they really care about, and then they can just be shot down because they're not viewed as maybe necessarily being you know, held across the entire nation. I would strongly suggest that even a small, you know, maybe I know us and Bristol and a couple of other SUs should be able to focus our efforts on issues that affect this part of the country without them being shot down on the wider scale. Now, and yeah, I think that by the nature of this convoluted system, and by the way, everyone who I've spoken to this to kind of in preparation for this have always like kind of done the digital equivalent of just rolling their eyes and saying, yeah, it's a convoluted system, or I hated when I dealt with them, or all of this, that, and the other. And it completely and just for everything kind of peripheral outside of the kind of absolute facts about this organization that I've heard, just make it sound like an utter bureaucratic nightmare to work with. And really, if we're going to encourage student engagement, if we want to encourage student engagement in politics, we want to remove that red tape. We want to remove that initial hurdle that people have to hop over in order to get engaged, because we ultimately want more people to be engaged in politics. We want more people to be letting their voice be heard. And if that means stepping away from a large national organization, so be it. Because if it takes us, focusing on local issues, and as I say, yeah, so be it. Quite a lot. So kind of moving on to onto some more points that Joe made. Like we've had this characterization kind of throughout Ethan and Joe's speeches that 30k or even 60k isn't an awful lot of money because it represents a small percentage of funds. But then at the end of the day, if the SU is seriously considering making cuts based on a 200k deficit, clearly the absolute sums have an awful lot of sway in the final result. Like if you think about societies that have £300 annual budgets, or a bit more, or you think about sports that might have a little bit more than that, like that money could make an awful lot of difference to an awful lot more students that care an awful lot more than the 30k that's going off to this obscure kind of almost blurred face kind of organization that people clearly kind of don't know how to operate, or if they have operated with them are struggling. So yeah, the dismissal that because it's a small percentage means that the absolute amount is meaningless, I think is an incredibly flawed argument, because it is still ultimately a lot of money. I mean, it's the tuition fee for an entire degree at the end of the day, every year. Now we're also we're kind of told that if we leave, that we would be kind of disconnected from this national group of SUs, and that we'd lose a massive amount of our kind of collective planning and stuff. But actually, I would completely suggest that if you go through and read the actual specification of what we get out of the NUS charity and the NUS separately, and I encourage you to do this before you vote, an awful lot of the important stuff, the stuff that is crucial for planning and crisis management and that makes a real difference, is under the NUS charity, that we're guaranteed to still get regardless of the vote of this referendum for £7,500 a year, and includes the biopower stuff as well, but includes some really, really good stuff, and is completely separate from this 30 grand that we're discussing here, that costs 4 times as much and provides to how I read the tables an awful lot less. So I think it's perfectly acceptable to be asking questions about how the body that represents us spends its money. I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask that they invest money where more students will see it. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, hang on a second, why don't we maybe step back for a year, see if we can run local campaigning ourselves, see if we can, talk to our MP more directly for votes, as opposed to trying to go via the government national method. So overall, yeah, I would strongly suggest that you guys get out there and you vote that that this year, no, we don't want to join this large bureaucratic mess. Thank you.
Awesome. That was a great debate. We have a lot of questions, which is great. I would now just give you guys time, if you haven't had so, just to have a quick read through the questions and maybe upvote the ones you find interesting, and then also give the speakers, especially Aidan now, some more time to have a look at the questions, to think of who wants to answer them, respectively of the government and the opposition side. So I'll just give a few minutes for that. And we have more questions coming in, 20 so far. Great. On 19. I guess I can get started. So the most favorite question was, what other SUs have left and what have they accomplished. So I guess this would be a question for the disaffiliation side. Aidan or Jacob, would one of you be happy to, do you guys have any examples or have you read about anything that would be relevant to that question?
Sure. So I guess there's the national ones that I mentioned, such as the Forgotten Students one that recently came out, and the that want to do the referendum for our future's sake. But also more specifically, I briefly looked into this just now, and as an example, Surrey Students' Union, they're disaffiliated, and they ran a campaign to promote the issue how they pay a lot of rent there, and they don't get enough of a student loan, and that was successful in pushing local parliamentary candidates to voice this issue and get it addressed on the national stage, and that was completely outside the NUS, and it would be arguable how successful theirs would be.
Awesome, thank you for that. Another really popular question was, I and many of my colleagues do not believe in a lot of the NUS campaigns. Why should we be part of something which is dominated by mostly far-left political views? So I guess this would, to convince that person and many of their colleagues, I guess I would ask the pro-affiliation side, so maybe Ethan or Joe, to respond to that question.
I'm happy to take this, yeah. I'd say that you're entitled not to support the campaigns that the NUS runs, and indeed it's inevitable that an organisation as small as Bath SU or as big as the NUS is going to be ultimately speaking for not the totality of everyone that it represents, but for a majority. And ultimately, the reason we should stay affiliated to the NUS, despite the fact that the campaigns it does now don't represent you, is because, again, the NUS is going to continue. It's going to continue to exist, and importantly, it's going to continue to claim to speak on behalf of all students and to do all of these campaigns, whether you're affiliated or not. But it's only while your university is affiliated that you have the right, if you choose to get involved and to stand to be a delegate and to say, actually, no, I don't support these campaigns. Here's what we should be talking about instead. We shouldn't be so far left, or whatever it is that your position is. And I'm going to put this motion forward that says otherwise. And if you lose, you'll know it's because your views are a minority. And if you win, you'll have made a real difference. But you don't have that opportunity if your student union disaffiliates, because all disaffiliating accomplishes is disconnecting you from national campaigning and student democracy that's going to continue to happen either way.
Awesome, thank you for that. The next two questions are related. Both discuss the SU finances and that we are clearly in a deficit, and one then further explaining that, well, now for the time being with COVID, we could disaffiliate and then affiliate in the future when maybe there's a lower deficit. I guess we could ask both sides to respond to this question. Maybe if we first start with the Gov side, and maybe they could respond in saying how maybe remaining with the NUS might actually be beneficial for our finances. So I would ask Ethan or Joe maybe to respond to that as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one.
Awesome, thank you.
So as I mentioned a second ago, I think that as the finances go, the £30,000 that we spend is actually it's quite a small sum in the grand scheme of things, and the savings that we're going to make that would be made from disaffiliation, I think, really pale into insignificance when you think about being part of an organisation and having this collective voice to lobby the government, and the money the funds that's going to generate by putting pressure on the government to represent us as a student body. I saw another question on here which I think ties into it quite well, on saying, why would these hardship funds not have been achieved by us as an SU alone? And I really don't see that could be the case. I think that it's only as a complete, I mean, obviously we know how tight budgets are in the government at the moment, and it requires this collective voice of students to work together and put pressure to get those hardship funds and those policies that benefit us. Alone, we're not going to make a difference on those finances by, campaigning to the government by ourselves, which I think it just shows how really important it is to really be collective and work at this as a student body as a whole.
Awesome. Maybe Aidan or Jacob, do you guys want to directly respond to that question about finances?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to go for that one.
Sorry. Well, you
Sorry.
can take a bit in a sec.
Sure.
So just to that, I'd almost respond with a question of, do you really think that the government's doing an awful lot for students in this COVID crisis? Like, I mean, I've seen almost universally, disparaging and kind of even mocking remarks about how much the students have been forgotten. We saw the beginning of this year that students were, told that we would have vast amounts of in-person time, and moved in and paid their landlords and signed their tenancies, and then still ended up, and still ended up kind of screwed. So clearly that the NUS isn't doing an amazing job at representing students, or at the very least, if they are representing students, the government are just turning around and ignoring them anyway. And also, you also suggest that we can't do any government level local campaigning, and that's kind of what our MPs are for. Like, we live in a representative democracy. We can campaign for our MP's vote, and the MP can be our representative to government, which so there are many more mechanisms, and just kind of, so there are many more mechanisms that we can do this. The government I think, Joe and Ethan's kind of claim that the government have really been held to account well over this crisis is frankly ridiculous. But yeah, and just kind of on that finances note, like 30 grand is at the end of the day a lot of money, but we've been given the stat of this 200k deficit, so we could cut literally 1/7 of that, of the kind of COVID problem of not having students buying booze in the SU, just straight away with a single year of not being engaged in this, and we can let it tick on. We can see how these reforms are playing out. So I just think that it's a smarter move. It's good for the finances in the shorter term, and it's good, and it's just overall the most beneficial play to make now. And it also happens to cast the vote for saying that no, the NUS isn't doing what we want. It isn't necessarily representing our views, because the students hold a wide and diverse array of political and socioeconomic opinions.
Yeah, I was just going to add to the fact that I think it's very wrong to say that £30,000 is a small amount. It's about the salary of a staff member roughly. So when the SU is facing these difficult decisions of where they need to save money, keeping a staff member, or on the other hand hiring an extra staff member, however they just decide to use it, will be very beneficial.
Hi, awesome. Thanks for the responses. So I guess the next question I can answer is, what involvement experience do the speakers have with our SU and then NUS? So Joe and Aidan are, as me, members of the debating society, which I guess is hosting this. I guess I could have done the marketing earlier. And Jacob and Ethan are both members of the SU interested in the issue, and who recently just carried out a lot of research on the issue. Then the next question is the Remain side aware that the NUS had nothing to do with the rent debates? it was done by OSU and collaboration with the local universities around us. I guess this is not a question, but I'm still happy for the Remain side to respond to it if they have anything to say.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think, just because, obviously SU Bath and NUS both had involvement in making this happen. And obviously, no campaign that the NUS as a national body could ever help win from the government or from a single university is ever going to be unambiguously down to the NUS. And similarly, there's no achievement of a local students' union, lobbying the government or lobbying its own university that doesn't have some credit of the NUS, if they're affiliated, because the NUS, provides this guidance, provides resources, helps with training, does a whole lot of work with, its own full-time staff members and so on, to make local students' unions more effective. But also at the national level, the sort of wider point here is that having one voice for students across the country, what it does is it shapes the discourse. Basically, it unifies the demands that we're making, and the alternative, if we didn't have the NUS in its current form, or if we as SU Bath weren't affiliated, is ultimately that there's less coordination, and that's specifically on political sort of campaigning, I emphasize, which has won all these hardship, from central government specifically, it's been the NUS's demands about hardship funds and about rent rebates that have been met. And were local students' unions capable of making those same demands themselves? Yeah, but they were also capable of making different demands or pursuing different strategies or pursuing different priorities, and ultimately confusing the message. If you're the government or if you're a university, the National Union of Students provides a degree of authority that a local SU doesn't, and if it's easier to kind of accede as the government to one set of demands than to a series of slightly different ones from all across the country. And similarly, if you're an anti-student government like the one that we've got, that has sought to blame huge amounts of pandemic transmission and sought to vilify us as kind of paragons of cancel culture and so on, and you want to dismiss things that students say, dividing this national student body in this way does nothing but give the government an excuse. That's not to say they've been good during the pandemic, but they certainly could have been worse. The NUS has done substantial work, and what has been done, the rebates that have happened, the funds that have been provided in this pandemic, in a time of crisis, as a result of the strength of the NUS that has been built up by affiliation over the preceding years, that has been substantial, and it's been led by the NUS. Yeah, that answers the question.
Awesome. Thank you for the response. I guess this is a general question, so anybody who wants to respond to it. Do you think the national presence of the NUS allows them to just claim credit for all the stuff that happens for students nationally? And I guess the question also focuses on what has happened to students nationally very recently. Would anybody want to respond to that?
Very briefly, I think I kind of already touched on it, talking about the interplay between local students' unions and the NUS. The NUS provide resources for local students' unions, and they get their authority and receive their delegates and receive their directions and their policy from local students' unions. So really, it's a case of, if the NUS achieves something, SU Bath gets its own credit, every local student union gets its own credit, and the other way around. If we achieve things, we, I think, have the NUS and what they've helped provide to thank for part of it. That's my understanding.
Awesome. The next point is also not a question. Successful SUs not affiliated to NUS, and then there's a list of universities. I suppose the speakers probably don't have a background on all of these universities, so maybe if the person who has sent that question, maybe they can respond with another question of giving specific examples, and then we maybe can lead from there, but I think from that point we cannot move forward. Then another question that just has been upvoted is, how would disaffiliation affect things for our SU officers specifically? So I guess Jacob or Ethan, you'd be the right people to respond to that.
So I guess that's partly down to our SU officers to answer for that, but there is also the fact, so they have been building networks with other SUs throughout their time to hear what issues they face and how they solve issues. So it already exists, these networks, to have a national campaign. They will still get support from the NUS in other forms as well through the NUS charity. It's not like our SU loses all, it's just specifically campaigning. And also there are organisations such as Wonky, which can help get the message out there of what students are facing, arguably better from a more seen as press side, reporting both sides of the issues somewhat. Yeah. I hope that answers somewhat.
Awesome. Now I'd say that we have so many questions and they keep coming. So I would say that from now on, let's do another around 6 questions, and then I think that's good for today. So the next question is, how did NUS support Bath with the no detriment rent debates, etc.? Would anybody want to respond to that specifically?
Yeah, I'll take that one.
Okay, thanks, Ethan.
So something that I've mentioned already is that one thing that the NUS does is provide resource to the university, to the student unions, to help their campaigning against the universities. So, for example, one of the officers was talking about with the no detriment policy specifically, the NUS provided resources, including a helpful interactive map, which helped them to inform their campaigning, as well as holding meetings with NUS representatives. So you have the NUS officers that are able to work with lots of different unis and work out what the best way of approaching these campaigning on the university level, and then we'll hold meetings with people in our SU to help better inform the way that goes about and make sure that that's done in the most effective way. I think the same goes for the rent rebates. It's not necessarily taking away credit from our student union to say that the NUS has an involvement. It's their involvement is by providing resources and support to help do it in the most effective way. I hope that answers the question.
I hope it does too. So
can I just jump in for like,
sure.
So actually one of our questions actually just added that that Surrey aren't part of the NUS and they have been given a no detriment and rent rebates. So just to kind of bring the other side of that coin is that it's by no means guaranteed, and it may be that it may be that interactive map was useful and that campaigning was useful, but producing an interactive map for once in 100 years pandemic isn't so much what I'd expect for 30 grand a year. Sorry, that was a bit of a cynical argument, but just Surrey as an example goes to show that you can make these kind of campaign successes, especially when the uni knows that that they'll be keeping their reputation in the clear, because these policies that are wide and national and would be with or without the NUS, the universities want to make sure that they can keep their reputation in good stead so that people keep coming and they keep getting their 9.5 grand a year from the students. So universities have reasons to want to make the students happy and to not get bad press. So I think it's just to kind of provide the other side of the coin of that argument is that it very much is possible to get these kind of things pushed through without the NUS support, and yeah, we can look to do that independently if we so choose.
Awesome. I'd say at this point, 5 more questions. I hope I can count it. Okay, that's a long question. Surely this is a question about education. How is the student body going to suddenly change and become engaged by disaffiliation with the NUS? Most people at university, unfortunately, are uninterested in politics. For those who want a voice, they should be allowed the opportunity to speak on the national level. If my tuition fees are going to anything, it will be to have a voice. Awesome. Does anybody want to respond to that?
I'm happy to take that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, so not everyone wants to get involved in student politics, and there are people who do want to and are very passionate about it. And sadly, with the NUS, not all of those can get involved, only 6. And for those elections every year, many people go for them and not all can get involved. But if our SU was to run these campaigns from the ground up along with others, more students can get involved with more campaigns, making them properly student-led and representing what are issues and what we are facing to prevent and making sure that our university can focus on us and what we want, rather than trying to confuse what we want and the NUS wants.
Can I respond to that quickly as well?
Of course.
Yeah, so obviously the motions that the way that the policy making for the NUS works, as far as I understand, is that motions can be submitted to the NUS, or certainly can be submitted to Bath Students' Union to be taken to NUS conference by anybody. The 6 elected delegates that SU Bath sends are just, the people who get to vote on our behalf. And obviously 6 doesn't sound like a huge amount. I think there's a persuasive argument to be made that if you want to have a national union of students, it should have policymaking and officers elected directly by all the students through some kind of online ballot. I'd probably support that if it were brought up. But firstly, obviously, we don't get to make that demand and actually make that change happen if we're not affiliated. And secondly, it's not quite right to pretend that those 6 elected delegates with a vote at the conference, and that's 6 just from Bath, and 6 for all of the hundreds of SUs that are affiliated. The motions can come from anyone. It's not just those. Anyone can talk to those delegates and ask them to push things forward. Those aren't the only people who can get involved in NUS politics. But I think that argument kind of speaks to the theme of bringing a problem without a solution, and talking about the NUS doesn't listen enough, so we should leave and not have a voice at all. I just don't see how disaffiliation is the solution to the problems with the NUS that are being brought. I think it indicates that we have a problem, but it isn't going to change anything because it doesn't provide a solution.
Thanks, Joe. That was a really nuanced response. A question I also found really interesting. Oh, I just got done with it, but I'll ask it anyway now. Talking about alternative national platforms and how they can offer benefits, maybe without the costs of the NUS, or like smaller costs potentially. The question also mentioned WONC HE. Does anybody want to respond to that question?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about that for a second. Yeah, I think it does go to show that by the fact that there are alternate platforms, I mean, at the end of the day, most of the benefits that the kind of representation that we have and the kind of coordination with SUs could pretty much be drawn together by a group chat, a WhatsApp group chat of all the SU presidents, and be done with it. Like the kind of coordination can be done so easily via the internet these days. So most of the kind of those kind of coordination and communication of finding out who's doing what, and kind of responding to that, and things like how best to approach this, that, and the other. I think that kind of falls down just by the nature of how kind of open communication is these days, in terms of being able to quickly and easily convey messages between SUs and ask what various people are doing. Like, I mean, I'm part of the maths department, and they said, they very quickly, when they put out their COVID exam policies, said, hey, we did this, and we checked with, we checked with Oxford, we checked with Imperial, we checked with Warwick, Sussex, whoever else. And I think that just goes to show that, yeah, there is an awful lot of other avenues of communication other than the NUS. So it being one larger, so-called unified voice, I think is a not nuanced enough way of looking at the picture.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Did I just hear somebody who wants to respond?
Yeah, just really, really quickly, and I feel like I'm coming in a lot, but tiny point is that when the NUS specifically has, 95% of students' unions nationally affiliated, and when it has this kind of position and this official sort of mandate as being the best placed organization to speak on behalf of students as a whole, it does, going through other avenues does leave that problem of, well, who are you to speak on behalf of all students? And I think there's a lot to be said for wins that other organizations can have and that disaffiliated unis can get that are kind of just national consensus following the lead of NUS campaigning, but also all that stuff about like more decentralized stuff, more kind of informal group chat coordination, other campaigns. Again, none of it mutually exclusive. No good reason we can't do all of that, as well as the more structured campaigning that the NUS does currently. And if anything, again, I think the NUS possibly has a lot to learn from those approaches, but we have to be in it to make it better and to make it more like the kind of national student voice that the opposition want to see.
Awesome, thanks for that. I'd say we answer 3 more questions. So what has the NUS done for Bath before COVID?
I'll come in there if that's all right.
Sure.
So firstly, I think a really important point to make, and this is something I've seen come up in the questions already, is about international students and who perhaps feel like maybe haven't been represented so far. The NUS actually was part of a took the Home Office to court and proved the government wrong in its attempt to deport about 48,000 international students, and that was back in 2016. So I think that's really important, and I think it really does show that the NUS has genuinely cares about international students. The NUS is also the reason that students don't pay council tax, and for postgraduates that are listening, they also were heavily involved in campaigning that got postgraduate loans introduced and removed age caps on postgraduate loans. So there's a few examples.
Yeah, as somebody who's now not paying council tax, I'm very happy with that answer. Then another question, wouldn't this affiliation mean that we are become increasingly isolated as an SU and have no national connection or abilities then to influence policy? Okay. Would somebody like to respond to that?
Sure.
Oh, sorry, Jacob. Okay.
So yeah, we've already got plenty networks informally formed with students' unions. There's no reason why we should be paying £30,000 for them every year. There are organisations that do represent the student voice as well, other than the NUS, that are free or a lot cheaper, such as One Key, which you can access for free or pay for a subscription as a press service. But yeah, why should we be paying £30,000 for these networks when we can form them and are forming them ourselves?
Awesome. I think this last question is a really good ending point, and I would like to, it's asking whether there have been any specific campaigns that had a national impact, and maybe we could talk about one of these campaigns specifically, and then by the pro-affiliation side, and then ideally the disaffiliation side would be allowed to have the last word and respond to that, or say something else they want to finish off with. So can I ask either Ethan or Joe to respond to that?
I can take it.
Awesome.
I think the sort of suite of benefits that students have had during the pandemic are probably the best example of the work that the NUS can do. Like Ethan, gave some great examples of work that the NUS has done in the past, but I see kind of the the coherent early national push for new no detriment policies that hadn't really had to be done in such a nationwide way before, in time for exams in 2020. I think was a very sort of clear example of how a national body with a national mandate can, start a campaign and make our voices heard and make the demand heard quickly enough for it to actually be acted on in time. I think it's a really clear example of something that the NUS could do that wouldn't have been realistically achievable at such speed and with such sort of clarity if it were more disparate and there were people who were disagreeing. There was lots of so many different inputs into how it would work. And similarly, again, the rent rebates and the new hardship funds from the government, I really do like. Granted, I take quite a cynical view of this government. I may not be alone in that, but I do think that any excuse they could have taken to further ignore students, given that they, locked some, or rather that wasn't the government, that was the uni, but they have sought to blame rather students for huge parts of the pandemic in the way they have. I just don't think them making money available to compensate students for loss of rent and fees would have happened if they'd had the excuse of not having a single place to hear it from. And I think our years of payment of affiliation are kind of all dwarfed by the millions and millions of pounds that have been put back in students' pockets by those government moves that they've been forced into. I think all that affiliation has represented an investment in national single voice student campaigning that we should continue to make for dark times like the times we've been living in.
Those were awesome final words by the pro-affiliation side, but now I'd like to give the disaffiliation side maybe a last chance to respond to whether that investment was worth it and what are maybe the alternatives.
I'm happy to take it if you want.
Awesome, thank you.
So I think overall, kind of this evening, we've really been just kind of weighing up of this kind of, this fairly tiered system of delegates and proposals and things, and whether that's a really good way of communicating things to the government for a fee of 30 grand versus kind of more maybe informal and substantially cheaper mechanisms and the combination with local campaigning. And just as for whether it's been successful or whether it's been good, I just point back again at that example of Surrey that clearly, it did happen, and it's silly to say that kind of doom and gloom of, oh, what would we have done if? But also at the same time, I think that we are also all adults. We can email our MPs. We can kind of operate as independent adults that being a student is one facet of our kind of political identity, as it were. So overall, I am completely convinced that 30 grand for 6 delegates to attempt to represent us on a wider national stage is it's a ridiculous amount of money, and it could be put much better places elsewhere, especially as the SU is hurting financially at this point.
Awesome. I want to thank all of you, Ethan, Jacob, Joe, and Aidan, for these awesome speeches. And I guess if you guys have any further questions or you just want to keep talking about this, and then I guess also making an informed decision in the near future when the referendum is, I think it opens the 25th of February, the polls for the referendum, then I guess you can just contact them. I bet they won't mind chatting with you a bit. And I guess I should have started with this, but this was hosted by the Bath University Debating Society. I'll just put the chat of our website in the chat. And if you kind of enjoy just these discussions about politics, where you can talk about kind of the stakeholders that are impacted by different decisions, and or if you just want to, one of the comments earlier was that one of the main things about being a student is having a voice, and I guess public speaking or just being able to discuss stuff is a great way of making that voice heard. So if you are interested in debating, please have a look at the website and maybe consider joining us.